Welcome to the lectures on service management principles. The topic now is reciprocal return on relationship, RoR. Let's first start by looking at customer perceived value. It can be looked at in very many ways, but the simplest way of describing it to say that CPV, customer perceived value, is benefits for the customer divided by total costs. And total costs, well, that is the price the customer pays and the relationship costs over time occurring for the customer. This shows that value can only be perceived over time. We can of course make projections of how value is developing over time and calculate the net present value for analysis. Now, what is the benefit for the customer then? Well, it is perceived quality. And the perceived quality is a function of outcome and process, what the customer gets and how the process functions in the eyes of the customer. So benefit to the customer is technical quality, what, plus functional quality, how, to use the quality terminology from service management. This means that we can use this rather simple formula to understand customer perceived value. It's technical quality plus functional quality divided by price plus relationship costs. Of course, this formula cannot directly be used for calculations. It has to be monetized first to find a value on the various variables in the formula. But it conceptually is of managerial importance because it shows which are the aspects of a relationship that influences the value customers perceive they get over time. Now, let's now move into a situation where we add the supplier side into the business. Let's look at the middle part of the slide. There are customer processes and supplier processes. And in the middle is something called practice matching. Now, the interesting thing first is to observe that the customer goes through a voyage. In earlier lectures, I talked about the customer voyage and that the supplier or service provider has to travel through with the customer throughout the voyage and support every part of it. So here some normal processes that in this case, business-to-business customer goes through. And on the supplier side, there are normal processes that the supplier has to take care of, either alone or perhaps with a network partner. Now, if we are to develop a functioning relational business which will give a good return, we have to make sure that the supplier processes match the customer processes. Now that's called practice matching in the middle. As a matter of innovating, aligning customer and supplier processes, resources and competencies so they match each other better from an economic or commercial point of view. Who does the matching? Well, both in the best case, but depending on the power structure and other issues, it may be the supplier who demands the customer to adapt, or it may be the customer who demands the supplier to adapt. But it's always a matter of adaptation. That's what you call practice matching. Now, looking up on the slide, on the customer side, the way the supplier then supports the various customer processes will have an effect of a technical sort, a sort of technical value measured in operational terms on the customer's processes. We can call that practice efficiency or process efficiency. And if the matching has functioned well, the customer's processes will be more efficient, measured in for example, in volume or quality or time or any other technical way. But the same happens for the supplier. We can talk about the practice efficiency developing when this practice matching had taken place. The supplier can, in the best case, function more efficiently, or perhaps on the same efficiency level as before. This is kind of a technical value measurable again in for example, volumes, quality, and so forth. Now, the next phase is to look further. This is the same figure as in the previous slide. But looking at this from the customer process, the practice efficiency translates into business effectiveness. Because if the customer processes are now run in a more efficient way, we probably either save costs or get price increase opportunities or additional sales opportunities, or all of this, which creates a business effectiveness. Easily put, the economic result of the customer has improved. But the same goes for the supplier as well. The practice efficiency that the supplier can achieve can be translated to business effectiveness, a financial value measurement again, which can then be measured in terms of revenues that can be then generated from the customer, and in the best case, the revenue increase, cost, perhaps cost savings, maybe other effects that can be monetized as well. Now, this is what the relationship should lead to if it functions well. So how do we go from here to return on the relationship and to reciprocal return on the relationship? Well, first of all, defining reciprocal return on the relationship, RoR. Well, it is the long-term financial outcome emerging for all parties, resulting from the establishment and mutual maintenance of a relational business engagement. Now, this means that it is the return of what the two parties invest in the business engagement that they are going into, and measured in the long term, measured in terms of, for example, revenue changes, new revenues, cost changes, increases, decreases, and so forth. Now, some background facts of importance here is that business relationships include at least two parties. Could be more. In my examples here, I just use two parties to keep it as simple as possible. And they are both in the same boat. All parties should gain from the relational business engagement. Both parties should gain. And to achieve that, operational processes must be adjusted. That is the practice matching. And then the business gains must benefit both parties. For example, when both do changes in their processes or resources, productivity for the supplier and customer changes. But we can't calculate separate productivities in a relationship. We should really try to calculate joint productivity gains, something that's been development of my colleague Pekka Helle. And then the value gains that follow from productivity gains, they must be shared between both. Cannot be kept by one party, the supplier, for example, only. So investments in the relationship must be calculated as reciprocal return on relationships. We have to calculate the return on the investment as a reciprocal return. Joint productivity gains must be calculated together, and the return on the relational business engagement must also be calculated together. So how to do that? Well, it follows three phases. Again, this looks complicated, but the idea here is very easy, and we are only talking about calculating or projecting costs and revenues, changes in cost levels and revenue levels. Nothing more. But of course, the process can be laborious and take time. So let's start from the bottom. The first thing to do is the practice matching part. Meaning, looking at number 1 down there, alignment of resources, processes, and competencies. When this has been done, both parties can calculate the changes in costs. 2A, changing in provider costs. This is the relational investment of the service provider. And 2B, changes in the customer costs. That is the relational investment for the customer. Now moving up to phase 2 here, calculating the incremental value gain. Well, looking to the left of the figure, the arrow that goes up from provider costs, the provider cost change, that is the change in the provider's internal efficiency, separate productivity if you want. That is how much more efficient is the provider now, measured in cost efficiency terms. On the right-hand side, the customer changes in customer cost translates to the customer's internal efficiency. But you see in the same box, number 4 there is also a delta customer's external efficiency, that is changes in revenues. This is a projection that has been done, a projection that must be done about how much, given the support of this provider we now are going into business with, can the customer expect to get additional business or additional revenues from the same business through premium pricing, for example. And number 4 here means that the customer calculates what is the cost change and adds to that what is the projected revenue increase over time. 3 was the provider's cost change, internal efficiency. The provider does not and cannot at this time make a projection of revenue increase because we don't know about how do the two parties share the gain that we achieved at this point yet. Well, when you pull together phase 3 and phase 4, we come to the joint productivity gain. There we see how much does the productivity of the relationship improve, seen together as a relationship. And this translates to number 5, incremental value gain. The incremental value that is created. 5 and 6 are probably the same figures because productivity gains probably is already measured in monetary terms. So there we have the value gain. And the value gain, just to say it again, is how much did the service provider save on costs? Or how much did the service provider have extra costs? To which we add the cost changes of the customer. And the customer probably should save some costs. And how much does the customer expect to get new revenues? So it's easy mathematics. The problem is to get the figures out of the books. Now, then we come to number 7. Now we can go into a price negotiation phase because now we know how much there is to share the incremental value created. And based on this price negotiation, we come to 8A, which is how much of the incremental gain can the service provider keep in the form of a higher price. And 8B, how much of the value gain will the customer get? And now we have everything needed to do the reciprocal return on relationship calculations. And that's again easy mathematics. In the middle on the top, in phase 3, reciprocal RoR. Well, it's a matter of 8A plus 8B divided by 2A plus 2B, meaning value gain for the customer plus value gain for the provider plus value gain for the customer divided by cost change for the customer plus cost change for the supplier. There we have the relationship-related return, reciprocal return on relationship. Then we can do separate return on relationship calculations. To the left, the provider return on this relationship. Well, it's 8A divided by 2A. That is the value gained for the provider divided by the relational investment in terms of provider costs changes. And then we come to the right, calculate customer return on relationship as 8B divided by 2B. That is value gained for the customer divided by the customer's additional costs, which equals the relational investments of the customer. Easy mathematics. It looks difficult, but it isn't. But then comes difficulties. And that is to get all this together and get the figures required. But let me first walk through as a summary the steps in the process of calculating return on relationship. First, a service perspective is taken by both parties, meaning that both parties realize that we want to mutually support each other's businesses and processes. Secondly, a strategic decision to align practices is taken by both parties and then implemented. And this is a rather big deal normally, to decide that we get this close to each other and do these calculations. Third, cost changes caused by the process are calculated. Fourth, the customer's projected revenue increase is estimated. The fifth phase is the joint productivity gain is calculated. The sixth phase, the monetized joint productivity gain equals the incremental value gain in the relational business engagement. And then 7, we go into a price negotiation, and through that the incremental value gain of the relationship is shared between the customer and the provider. And the final phase is to calculate the reciprocal return on relationship and also the separate returns on relationship for the provider and the customer respectively. In this, on this slide, all this is just put together in just one model that shows that it goes for taking a service logic, to doing the practice matching, to calculating the joint productivity gain, transferring it to the incremental value assessment, decide upon value sharing through price negotiation, and then calculate the returns on the relationship. Now finally, some critical requirements here. First of all, both parties need to understand and take a service approach. They must understand that this seems worthwhile and decide to take this. The strategic decision must be made. And provider and customer have to align the critical resources. And then comes a laborious phase. Value is measured in monetary terms for both parties. And this means that ABC, activity-based costing, probably will be required because the figures probably doesn't come out in as much detail as needed from the firm's books. And finally, there must be enough trust between the parties in order for this to function. There must be enough trust for them to open books and expose cost and revenue drivers to each other and to share related then accounting data. This trust must be there. And then, given the trust, management must decide to make the decision to go ahead with this. Go ahead with first the practice alignment process and then the detailed cost calculations. Just to finish it up with a small case. It comes from the paper and pulping industry, where there was a very interesting case where two suppliers of the pulping line offered it to the same new pulp and paper mill to be established. The one competitor offered it in a traditional way. The other competitor suggested to the pulp and paper company that they would get close to each other, compare costs and revenue drivers to find a better solution for the customer. The customer accepted, and they went through the process I have lined out here. They did the calculation. They did the laborious ways of ABC costing to get detailed enough figures. And the outcome was that this supplier got the deal. And the result was not only that they offered the pulp and paper, in this case the pulping line, included in the offering was maintenance, and maintenance including maintenance people that would be on the site and spare part depot on the site, because it turned out that this was would decrease maintenance costs so much that it offset the additional costs of doing it this way. So yes, there are a good example this works, and it is probably always a good idea to think about, can we do this, because it will show both parties what benefits there are from going into a relationship, not guessing it, by understanding the benefits that we come to find. The next lecture will be on service productivity as a learning process and as profit management. Thank you.